My next guests are two of the most prominent women in rock music today. They're also sisters. Of course, performing with the group Heart, they not only perform, but they also write and produce most of their songs.
Most people remember Heart for the hits, Magic Man, Barracuda, Crazy on You, but there's something about Ann and Nancy Wilson that gets overlooked in all the classic rock documentaries and greatest hits compilations.
A really unlikely set of, circumstances that makes this band Heart what it is. I think we're kind of a rare animal.
These two women didn't just survive the music industry. They spent 5 decades fighting it, reshaping it, and refusing to let it define them. While other bands from their era either faded away or kept touring on nostalgia alone, Heart kept reinventing themselves in ways that almost destroyed them multiple times.
In rock and roll, because there's two women, for one thing, two sisters at the center, and so there's an emotional breadth, which is not just surface pop kind of cultural stuff. There's a lot of depth in the songs that we choose to do and write.
This isn't a story about two sisters who made it big. It's about what happens when talent collides with exploitation, when family bonds crack under pressure, and when an industry built for men tries to package women who won't cooperate.
What was the reception like to see you, Nancy, absolutely up there shredding, Ann and Nancy on vocals? What was the world's reaction to you, two women rocking out?
Seattle in the late 1960s wasn't the grunge capital it would become decades later. It was just a rain-soaked city in the Pacific Northwest where Ann and Nancy Wilson grew up listening to their parents' record collection. The Beatles taught them about harmonies. Folk music showed them acoustic arrangements. Led Zeppelin gave them the template for what rock could sound like when it stopped apologizing. Ann developed a voice that could go from whisper to wail without losing control. Nancy picked up the acoustic guitar and turned it into a percussive weapon instead of just background texture.
In the mid-70s, when we released our first album, it's like in 75, back in the year of our Lord 1975, there were people were kind of jaw-dropping. It was like, what? That doesn't really compute, because it's not supposed to really exist at the time. So we were a little bit of an anomaly.
By the early 1970s, Ann had joined a local group that would eventually be called Heart. The lineup included Roger Fisher on guitar, Steve Fossen on bass, and Mike DeRosier on drums. Nancy followed in 1974, and suddenly the puzzle pieces locked into place. The band moved to Vancouver to get steady work and sharpen their sound, mixing folk delicacy with hard rock aggression in ways that radio had never really heard before. Their debut album, Dreamboat Annie, started small when it dropped through the tiny Canadian label Mushroom Records. But once American stations picked up Magic Man and Crazy on You, the album exploded across the charts. Critics called them the female Led Zeppelin, which was meant as a compliment, but also revealed how strange it was for women to be leading a hard rock band in 1976.
It's really rewarding to get out on big stages together, because we started as kids. And it was just a natural progression for us to do it for the rest of our lives.
Success should have been straightforward from there. It wasn't. Mushroom Records decided to promote Dreamboat Annie with a full-page magazine ad that implied Ann and Nancy were in an incestuous relationship. The tagline read, "It was only our first time," plastered next to the album cover. The sisters were humiliated. This wasn't edgy marketing. It was sleazy exploitation designed to sell records by turning their sisterhood into something scandalous. During a backstage party, a record executive actually asked Ann if the rumors about her and Nancy were true. Ann walked out. She sat down somewhere quiet and started writing. The lyrics that poured out became Barracuda, one of the most ferocious rock anthems of the 1970s. It wasn't subtle. The song attacked everyone who had tried to use and manipulate them, everyone who thought two women couldn't control their own narrative. Heart immediately broke their contract with Mushroom, which triggered a legal war that consumed the rest of 1977. The label retaliated by rushing out an unfinished patchwork album called Magazine without the band's permission. Heart responded by recording an entirely new album in 3 weeks under their new label, Portrait Records. That album, Little Queen, came out less than a month after Magazine and featured Barracuda as its centerpiece. The courts eventually ruled in Heart's favor, but the damage had already been done.
No possibilities of getting what I need. He looked at me and smiled. Said, no, 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 child.
By 1978, Heart looked unstoppable from the outside. Their album Dog and Butterfly produced hits and sold millions. Ann and Nancy were the undeniable creative center. But inside the band, everything was falling apart in slow motion. The problem was simple and complicated at the same time. Ann was dating Mike Fisher, the band's manager. Nancy was in a relationship with guitarist Roger Fisher, Mike's brother. Work and romance had tangled into one messy knot, and when those relationships started cracking, so did the band's unity.
How would you describe what Heart was, especially in that sort of, that, like I like to say, the golden age of Heart? What would you say, how would you classify that music? Because you did have sort of acoustic.
It was soft to hard rock because, geez, a song like Devil Delight, you know, that's a little more obscure, but man, it's the lyrics are hardcore and the music is heavy.
The men felt overshadowed as Ann and Nancy became the public face of Heart. The sisters grew frustrated by the male members' partying and lack of communication. By 1979, the tension had reached a breaking point. During a performance in Japan, Roger Fisher, overwhelmed by emotion and the unraveling relationship with Nancy, smashed his guitar on stage in what became known as the 𝐾𝐸. It was a moment of explosive frustration that symbolized everything collapsing behind the scenes. By October 1979, Roger Fisher quit the band entirely. The original lineup that had created Dreamboat Annie was finished. Ann and Nancy pushed forward with a rebuilt Heart, but the early 1980s were brutal. They tried modernizing their sound with synthesizers and electronic drums on albums like Private Audition and Passion Works, but the material just didn't connect. Radio trends were shifting. Their longtime producer was gone. The sisters felt increasingly disconnected from the music their label wanted them to make. Both albums underperformed commercially. In 1984, Heart was dropped from their record deal entirely. For the first time since the 1970s, Heart didn't have a label. They were exhausted, unsure of their direction, and watching the industry move on without them. Most bands don't survive a fall like that. Heart was at a crossroads where the easiest option would have been to walk away completely. In 1985, Capitol Records offered Heart a lifeline, but it came with conditions. The label wanted a full reinvention built for the MTV era. Out went the acoustic folk textures and Led Zeppelin influences. In came polished arena rock, pop hooks, and songs written by outside writers. Ann and Nancy agreed, and the strategy worked beyond anyone's expectations. Their self-titled 1985 album rocketed to #1, went quintuple platinum, and delivered a string of top 10 hits including What About Love and their first #1 single, These Dreams.
All I Want to Do is a song that was written by a really famous producer, writer, songwriter, Mutt Lange, who went on to do country music. And you could hear in that song the formulaic thing that was going to become country music that he was up to already at the time.
Suddenly, Heart was everywhere. MTV, magazine covers, sold-out arenas. They followed up with Bad Animals and Brigade, scoring more massive singles and becoming one of the defining forces of 1980s rock. Heart hadn't just staged a comeback. They'd become bigger than they'd ever been before.
Like, when you traveled, how many people, when you went on these trips, was it just the band, or did you go with band and crew, and how did you work it out?
Look at that. Voila,
Wow.
it is. Let's see, it was band and crew, a pretty narrow bunch of people.
Tight-knit
You
group.
know, we didn't have a big budget back then.
But the success came with hidden costs that ate away at the sisters privately. Capitol Records pushed a glamorous new image that strategically highlighted Nancy's physique while hiding Ann's weight in music videos. Ann was often filmed only from the waist up, a painful reminder of how the industry judged her appearance more than her voice. Creative control slipped away too. Many of the era's biggest hits weren't written by the Wilson sisters, leaving them feeling like performers on their own albums. Privately, Ann and Nancy turned inward. They spent nights isolated in hotel rooms, leaning on weed and alcohol to dull the stress. They never missed shows, but the pace was punishing. By 1990, burnout collided with shifting musical tides. Grunge was taking over, ironically rising from their own Seattle backyard, and the glam rock era Heart had dominated was collapsing. Recognizing the change, Ann and Nancy stepped away from the spotlight entirely.
What's your story on Barracuda?
Well, Barracuda was just a moment. It was a flash of anger.
The early 1990s brought an unexpected gift. Seattle's new rock generation, bands like Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains, treated the Wilson sisters as icons instead of relics. Heart released Desire Walks On in 1993, but the band soon went dormant again. The sisters focused on personal growth, film scoring, charity work, and healing from years of relentless touring. For the first time, the future of Heart was truly uncertain.
And Wilson says a Heart reunion is possible.
The early 2000s brought Heart back to life as younger listeners rediscovered 1970s authenticity. Ann and Nancy reunited in 2002 and started touring again. Their 2004 album, Jupiter's Darling, wasn't crafted for radio. It was raw, organic, and proudly rooted in their original sound. Fans and critics welcomed the honesty. Heart toured steadily throughout the 2000s, not as a nostalgia act, but as veterans with something real to say. Their 2010 album, Red Velvet Car, cracked the top 10, proving their relevance decades into their career. In 2013, Heart was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, with all 6 original members reuniting on stage to perform. Just when everything seemed stable, a family crisis shattered Heart's core. In 2016, Ann's husband, Dean Wetter, became involved in a physical altercation with Nancy's teenage twin sons backstage at a concert. Court documents revealed that Wetter had become enraged when one of the boys left a tour bus door open, allowing Ann's dogs to potentially escape. Wetter slapped one teenager, then punched him in the head with a closed fist. When the other twin intervened, Wetter allegedly choked him, with the teen later stating he couldn't breathe and feared for his life. Police arrested Wetter and charged him with 2 counts of assault. The incident made headlines and created a painful divide between the sisters. They finished the tour, but only by keeping separate dressing areas, separate makeup artists, separate managers, and traveling apart. The arrangement was written into their contracts as legally binding sanctuary zones. For 2 women who had spent a lifetime as a united front, this was unimaginable. When the tour ended, the band went dark. The public called it a feud, but the sisters described it as a deep personal fracture that needed time to heal. For 2 years, they pursued separate musical paths, unsure if the bond that built Heart could ever fully recover. Time brought the Wilson sisters back together. By 2019, they had reconciled and reunited for the Love Alive tour, playing to packed amphitheaters and proving their chemistry hadn't dimmed. Since then, Heart has performed selectively on their own terms, with no label pressure and no industry manipulation. They've become something rare in rock history, a legendary band that survives because they choose to, not because they have to.
Years of touring, writing, reinventing themselves, and surviving all the crazy ups and downs that a long career like theirs always throws at you is a testament to how close they really are and how deep their relationship is tied to their love of rock and roll.
Heart's story isn't a simple rise and fall. It's a cycle of evolution spanning 5 decades. They climbed from Seattle clubs to global fame, endured lawsuits, lineup implosions, reinventions, backlash, burnout, and family trauma. But Ann and Nancy always found a way forward. Their journey mirrors the industry itself, chaotic and brilliant and unfair and inspiring all at once. Through every reinvention, from the raw fire of the 1970s to the MTV polish of the 1980s to the stripped-back honesty of their later years, the Wilson sisters proved that resilience is its own form of artistry. Heart endures because sisterhood, authenticity, and sheer musical power never stopped beating. Most rock documentaries focus on the hits and the drama, but they miss something crucial about Heart. Ann and Nancy never had a blueprint to follow. There were no female-led hard rock bands charting a path before them in the mid-1970s. Every decision they made, from how to handle sexist marketing to navigating romantic relationships within the band, had to be figured out in real time with the entire industry watching. When Roger Fisher quit in 1979, they rebuilt. When labels dropped them in 1984, they adapted. When family violence fractured their bond in 2016, they eventually healed. That pattern of breaking and rebuilding became their true signature, more than any single song ever was.